What's up everybody, welcome back. So in the last episode we started setting up the widgets for the inventory, and in this episode I want to take a look at adding containers to the level and also make sure that we have the widgets for the containers set up as well. So we have something like this where we have a container widget and the player inventory both updating. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. If you like the series, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to support the channel, you can take a look at the Ko-fi page to buy me a coffee, or you can become a member on the YouTube channel as well. And both of those will give you access to the premium channel in the Discord, as well as a few premium downloads only available for supporters. So with that out of the way, let's start today's episode. So let's start by setting up the player inventory widget. So let's open this one up, and we want to duplicate this to make sure we can display the container inventory as well. So let's simply grab the border, Ctrl D to duplicate it, and now we have a second one. So for this one we want to make the border a variable, so I'm going to rename this border inventory world and turn it into a variable. Now let's make sure that it's properly aligned, so it's anchored to the center, that's fine. Then the position is going to be 800, and the second one, so the Y is -300. And then for the alignment we want to set this to 1, and that should make it pop into place. So we can change the text over here to say something like container, and that should pretty much be good to go. So if we select the grid inventory over here, we want to rename it to grid inventory world, and then that's all. I do want to add a little button in here so we can close the menu by clicking the button, as well as simply using our toggle button, so we have different options. So I'm going to grab a border and drop it right on top of here, anchor it to the bottom center, and inside of that border let's drop a button, and on top of the button we're going to drop some text. So for the border we need to turn it into a variable again, so this is going to be the border container buttons. Turn it into a variable, and let me grab my cheat sheet. So we're going to set the position to 800 -100. So 800 -100, and then for the size I have it 700 by 50, and the alignment is going to be 1 again. So for the button we want to change this into our button close container, and then for the text we can say close container. So let's give this the proper color and font, and maybe shrink it down a little bit. So I'm gonna align this border to the right side, and then for the other border I'm gonna set the proper color, so that's the brush color, and make it transparent. And then I'm gonna actually fix my spelling over here. There we go. So for the button we can change the appearance to make it look a little bit better. So we have our style over here, pressed, hovered and normal, and let's just give it a little bit of color. So for the normal one I'm gonna set it to 0.7, and then for the pressed one I'm gonna make it 1, and for the for the hovered one I'm gonna make it 1, and for the pressed one I'm gonna make it 0.3 again. So this is far from perfect, by the way, but you'll get the idea, whatever. So I'm not gonna bother with the looks. So this is what we're gonna do. Let's dive into the graph. Let's go back to the designer. We want to grab our border inventory world, and by default this is hidden, and do the same thing for the border container buttons. I'm also gonna set this to hidden, and I'm gonna enable size to content for now. So that's better. Now we can go into the graph, and we're going to create a function first. So that's called set container widgets visibility. So new function, set container widgets visibility, and this is going to have one input, and that's a boolean, our new visibility. So we can simply grab a branch, plug it in, And then we want to hide the border container buttons and the border inventory world. And simply set visibility so we can plug in both of them. So this is true, so they are going to be visible, and if it's false, they are going to be hidden. And make sure you plug both of them into the other one as well. So that's good to go. And then in the event graph, we want to add a little setup as well. So let's go to the event graph. We're not going to use this stuff, so right click and we're going to look for event destruct. So not construct but destruct. So this will get called every time the widget is destroyed. And for this we're going to set the container widget's visibility back to false. So the next time we open it, they will be hidden. And we're going to create the onClicked event for the close button. So select it and create onClicked. And in here we want to get our owning player, and that's going to return our player controller, so we can cast it to our third person player controller. And from here we can simply call our leave inventory menu and then remove the widget from the parent. Oh, I double clicked it. There we go. So I'm back in the widget and I want to remove from parent myself. So that's the entire update for the player inventory widget. That should be good to go. So now let's create the actual container. So let's go back into our inventory folder and I'm going to right click, create a new actor. So this is the BP container. And for now I'm simply going to open it and only create 2 variables, and then we're going to continue setting up some other stuff first. And after that, we're going to go back to this and finish it. So we need 2 variables in here. The first one is the container contents. So container contents. And that's an array of our inventory content structures. So contents. And turn it into an array. So for this one, we need to make it instance editable and exposed on spawn. And we do not need to replicate it, so that's fine. And we also need a second variable, and that's an array of interacting players. So interacting players, and that's an array of our third person characters. So third person character array, and that's fine. That also doesn't need to replicate. So for now we are good to go. We're going to compile and save it and get back to this later, because first we're going to set up some stuff in the third person character. Before we open up our character, we need to add one event in our controller. So let's open up the third person controller first, and in the event graph I'm going to create a custom event, and that's called container opened. So container opened. So we don't need to replicate this. In here we want to give it one input, and that's going to be our BP container. That's not, there we go. And then we want to set this to our BP container. So that's our actual blueprint. We want to grab an isValid node, and we want to check if our player inventory widget is valid. Plug it in here, and then we also want to know if it's in our viewport again. So let's drag off again, is in viewport, grab a branch, plug everything in, so is valid, and then the branch, and that's good. So if it's valid and it's inside of our viewport, we simply want to set the container widget's visibility. So let's drag the player inventory in and call our set container widget's visibility function. And we want to set it to true. Plug this into the true pin. And after that, we want to update the inventory grid for the container. So let's drag off the inventory again and call our update inventory. I didn't call it update, I call it setup inventory grid. Plug it in here. So this time we want to update the world inventory, and we're gonna grab the container from the event over here and get the contents. So get container contents and plug that in, and that should work. Now if we go back over here, so if our inventory is not valid, we're going to create it, and if it's not in the viewport, we're also going to create it. So we're going to simply drag in our UI show inventory menu and plug that into the false bin and to the not valid bin. And after that, we want to make sure that we continue by setting the container widget visibility and updating the grid. So all of this needs to be done locally, so we don't need to replicate this as long as we make sure that it's also called from the local player. So this is in our player controller. Now we're going to open up our character. And inside our character, we want to create a custom event. So inside of the event graph, let's create a custom event and call this one open container. So we're going to replicate this to the owning client. So this is going to be called by the server because the server is handling all of the interface stuff. And then this is telling the owning client to do all the widget stuff. So for open container, we can simply drag in our third person controller and we can call our container opened event and pass on the variable like so. And then we also want to create a variable on our third person character. So I'm going to drag off the container and simply promote to variable and call this my opened container. So opened container. And then I'm going to get rid of it over here. All I want to do is select it and make sure that it's replicated, and we're going to use it later. So we have a variable in place as well. Then we want to create a second event, and that's called server close container. So we're going to create a custom event, server close container. And for this one, we're going to replicate it to run on the server. So we want to grab in our open controller variable and check if this is valid. So is valid. Okay. There we go. And let me double check. So if this is valid, we're going to remove ourselves from the interacting actors array on the container. So let's drag off the container and get our interacting actors. And from here, we're going to drag off and say remove item. And we're going to remove ourselves from the array. So we can simply get a reference to ourselves. And that's good to go. So for debug purpose, I'm going to add a branch in here and simply print if this worked out or not. So this is kind of important. And if this fails, we pretty much want to know it. So I'm simply going to add two prints in here. The first one says player removed from interacting actors, and that's green. And the second one is red and says not removed. So I actually know if something's failing over here. And the last thing we need to do is grab our opened container variable and set it back to nothing. So we're not going to plug anything in. That's good to go. So this is a replicated variable and we made sure we are the server. So that should work. With those events in place, we want to go to our interface interact event. So over here we have the input and then our interface interact event. And we want to make sure that we do not interact with anything if we have a container opened. So I'm going to make a little bit of room before they interact with actor, disconnect it over here, drag in my opened container and simply grab another isValid node. So this should be valid and this should not be valid. So if the opened container is not valid, we're going to interact with actor, and if it's actually valid, we're not going to do anything because we do not want to interact with another actor to mess things up. So that's good as well. And then we're going to update a little bit in our event graph. So let's see, we have the overlap events over here. Overlap events for the mesh where we set our interactable actor. And because we can still move when we have our inventory screen open, so if we open a container, for example, and we walk away, we want this inventory screen to close, so we cannot interact with the container from miles away. So that's what we're going to do over here. We're going to create a new custom event and call that leave container trigger. So custom event, leave container trigger. And we're going to replicate this to run on the owning client. So run on owning client. And for this, we simply want to grab our third person controller. And from the controller, we can get our inventory. So that's the widget, player inventory. And we want to remove this from parent. And then we want to call our leave inventory menu function. So we want to drag off the controller for that one and leave inventory menu. So this is set to run on owning client. And over here we have the has authority check. We are the server. So we're going to grab an isValid node first for our opened container. So if we do not have a container open, we do not need to do anything. Plug it in here. And then simply call our leave container trigger event if this is valid. And that's good to go as well. So now if we walk outside of our trigger, we automatically close the container and the inventory widget. Okay, that's set up. Now let's see, we can actually set up the container widget. So let's go back into our blueprint container and let's build that one. So first of all, for the class defaults, we want to enable replication. So that's a pretty important one. Let's not forget that. And then we're going to add a component. So I'm going to add a scene component first, call this root and replace that one. Then I'm going to add a mesh and a trigger. So let's add a static mesh and that's my container mesh. So we don't really need to set anything except for replication. So if we scroll all the way down, component replicates, we want to enable that one. And then the collision should be fine. Block all dynamic, that's good. Now I'm simply going to use the create mesh and shrink it down a little bit. So 0.8, and that should be good to go. Then I'm going to add a box trigger. So let's look for a box collision. And I'm going to call this box trigger. So this needs to be a little bit in front of the crate. And for now, I'm going to set it to be visible in game so I can see it. And I don't think we need to set anything. No, we can simply use defaults for this one, so we could possibly bump it up a little bit, but that's whatever you prefer. So with the components in place, we need to do a tiny bit of work in the event graph, but that's not too shocking. So let's get rid of all of this stuff. And we're going to add our interface event. So to do that, first we need to add our interface. So let's go to the class settings and let's add an interface for our BPI interactable actor. So after we did that, we can go to the interface tab over here and double click our interact with actor event to create it. Now the first thing we want to do is grab our interacting players and we're going to add the player to this array, but we're going to use an add unique node in this case to make sure that we do not add more of the same player. So add unique, plug it in, and then we want to set our opened container variable. And because we are on the server right now, because we determined that when we used our interface event, so we're going to set our opened container variable from here. So let's drag off the player character and say set opened container, hook it up, and the opened container is a reference to ourselves. And then all we need to do is call our open container event. So let's drag off the player again and call open container. And again, plug it in and plug in a reference to ourselves. So the reason I'm not setting the variable over here is because this is replicated to run on the owning client, and we're actually using the replicated opened container variable, so the server needs to set it. So that's why we're setting the variable over here when we are still the server, and right here we are replicating back to the owning client. So if we set it over here, it won't work. Okay, so that's really the entire event graph. So let's compile and save it. And now all we need to do is go into our player inventory and make a small change to the setup inventory grid. So let's go to the widgets player inventory. And in the graph over here, let's go to setup inventory. Now we created local variables for this, so we can grab another branch in here. If we do not want to update the player inventory, we probably want to update the world inventory. And if that's true, we're gonna set the local variables again. So let's paste the setters over here. But this time we're gonna plug in our border inventory world, grid inventory world for the grid. And for the slots, we need to create the array. So we're simply gonna duplicate the one for the player slots. So all inventory slot player, duplicate it, all inventory slots world, and plug that one into the local variable over here. So after we did that, we can simply continue from the for each loop, and that will work. All we need to do is go back to the end over here. So if it's not the player inventory, we're going to grab another branch, plug it in, and we want to determine that it's the world inventory. So get world. Oh, really? There we go. And if that's the case, we want to store the local array back into the all inventory slot world array. So let's drag a setter for that one in and plug in the local inventory slot widgets. So that's good to go as well. And now we should have a working container with working widgets. The only thing is the contents of the container do not save, and the container itself doesn't save also. So we're going to look at that the next episode, but for now we should be able to test this. So let's run a 2-player game. And let's have a little look. So obviously we need to add containers to the level. That might actually work. So let's open up our viewport. And I'm simply going to place 2 of them. So let's get rid of this cube over here, drop in my container, make sure I rotate it so I can actually reach the trigger. And let's place a second one. So now in the details panel, we need to set the inventory contents. So for this one, I'm going to add 1 element, and that's going to be the orbs. And I'm going to add, let's say 4 orbs to this crate. And for the second one, I'm going to add 2 array elements. And I'm going to add the fan, 2 of them, and then also add some dishes. So the dish, and let's add 4 of those. So now we should have containers in the level. So let's save, close, and play this. So I'm the client, I need to select a save slot first, and I don't have anything in my inventory. That's fine. I can pick up some stuff, that doesn't really matter. So over here we can open the container. This one has 4 orbs in it, so that's good. If I walk away, it will automatically close the inventory screen, so that's good. If I go and stand here, I open up my inventory screen, that works. And then if I interact with the container, it actually doesn't work. Okay. So if I open it up right now, I can't open a second container. So we probably didn't set the variables correctly. So I'm going to dive in it quickly and get back to you. So I forgot to update one thing in our third-person controller. So in here we have the event leave inventory menu, and this is the local event if we use the keyboard key or the button on the widget to close it. So if we're not walking outside of the trigger, then the server will handle it. But if we use the keyboard key or if we use the button on the widget, we will handle it locally. So then at the end over here, we need to make sure that we call our server close container event on the character. So we're going to simply drag in our third person character and call server close container and hook it up to both of these branches. So then if we close it locally and we'll go in here, then the server will remove the opened container variable for us and remove us from the interacting players array. So with that setup, this should actually work. So let's have a second look. So again, I'm gonna select a save slot for the client, and I still have 2 orbs in there. And there's 4 orbs in the container, so I can't do anything with them, and we cannot actually save this as well yet, but we're gonna look at that in the next episode. So the close container button at the bottom here, that seems to work. And I can open this one now, so I think we fixed our issue. If I walk outside of the trigger, it's still closing, so that's good as well. And I wanted to show that if I already have my inventory screen open and then interact, it will simply add the container widgets to it. So that's working as well. And this should also work for the server. So we have our normal inventory, and over here we have the container inventories. And I can open and close them with the buttons or by walking outside of them or by using my keyboard. So everything seems to be good. So I think we have those set up as well. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at placing and taking items from the containers. And then after that, we're going to make sure that everything saves for the containers as well. So thanks for watching everybody, hope you enjoyed the video and you enjoy the series. If you do, please consider leaving a like as it helps me out tremendously. And you're also welcome to join the Discord if you want to ask a question about a video or just talk about some game dev stuff. So thanks for watching everybody, talk to you later, I'll be back soon for more.